Good morning, it's Brian. It's the Art of Startup War. We are back again. Today we are here with Dave from Gamma Diagnostics, a phenomenal company that are doing incredible things within the healthcare space. Yes, we invested in this company. Of course we invested in this company because it's changing everything forever. Nothing will be the same again. And as everybody knows, we have such a strong focus now in the healthcare space because we want to not only be able to bring companies through that can be worth billions of dollars in the future, but we want those companies to make a really positive impact in the world. And none more so than this company. Dave, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Brian.
So this is a bit of fun because generally the folks that are listening to this show are investors, people who are looking for really good investments, for companies that haven't quite reached unicorn status yet, but they can see that those companies are on the trajectory. They're looking for phenomenal founders that can break through. And most importantly, they're looking for companies that other investors have invested into, such as us. You'll also get a ton of entrepreneurs who are listening too, and they want to be able to emulate the great things that you're doing. And the fact that you're able to raise investment and that we gave it to you is a great beginning. Now, before we kick into the hero's journey, which is where we're going to look at all of the challenges you went through to get to where you are right now, and we're going to look at the glory that is still yet to come. First of all, let's talk a little bit about Gamma. And let's talk about what was the genesis of the idea, where did it come from, and when was the moment that you realized this is going to be something incredible and the world would never be the same again?
It's been a long road. Gamma was founded back in 2009, and we founded it with the idea that I had discovered a new risk factor for heart attacks and strokes in my research laboratory at the Oregon Health and Science University, where I'm a professor. And we thought, okay, this is a marker of inflammation, and it fits into the class of other markers like C-reactive protein, which is sometimes used for heart attack and stroke risk. And what was frustrating to me as an academic was that you couldn't measure this because there were no commercial tests for it. And we shopped it around to some of the big diagnostics firms, and they weren't interested. And I don't blame them. It was unproven at the time. So finally, I got frustrated enough and I said, okay, I'm just going to bite the bullet. I'm going to start my own company and do this. And so I went to our tech transfer department. I had filed all these inventions disclosures to them. And they helped me put together my own company. They paid for the incorporation fees in the state of Oregon, and we were off to the races. But it was sort of like being pushed out of the nest. It's like, go fly. Mm-hmm. And I am not a business person. I wanted somebody on my side who knew what they were doing. And so through various contacts, I managed to snag David Eastman, who was our founding CEO. And he took us on this journey. So we got a $1.5 million small business grant from the National Institutes of Health to actually develop this diagnostic test.
Incredible.
And we worked with our contract manufacturer, Zeus Scientific, in Branchburg, New Jersey, 3,000 miles away, and set up our own little laboratory. And sure enough, working with them, we were able to get a diagnostic test that was, I must say, it's really good. I mean, I've used it myself, and I'm impressed at how accurate and how fast and how easy it is. So that got us down the road. And so then we started shopping this thing around to other players who might be interested in bringing on a new diagnostic to tell who's going to get a heart attack or a stroke. And we started out with one company and looked very good. And they had a kind of panel approach to looking at this. So they don't just measure your LDL cholesterol and your HDL cholesterol. They had like 40 different markers that they were measuring, and ours fit into this one panel they had of inflammatory markers. And I thought, perfect, we're off to the races. They have a big client group of physicians who send them blood samples from their patients. They do the whole workup and send the results back. I thought, this is the fast track to success. And then the company, which shall remain nameless, was indicted for Medicare fraud. and they were sued by all their investors and eventually went bankrupt, and we were left holding the bag. In fact, we were sued for $30,000 as a part of all that, because we had sold them some of our diagnostic tests within 90 days of their bankruptcy. And somehow that made us culpable. We should have known that they were going bankrupt. So anyway.
Life lessons.
Yeah, life lessons learned. Nothing I was taught in graduate school, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And so that sort of set us on looking for partners. And so the idea just sort of languished there for a long time. But we knew a lot about this marker. We knew that it was actually a blood clotting factor, and it goes up with inflammation, and it makes blood clots that don't break down. And that's why we think it's a risk factor for heart attacks and strokes. So just this last year, COVID, of course, and COVID came out. And one of the things about COVID that had been reported is that it's associated with a huge, huge risk of inflammation in the seriously ill, critically ill patients in the hospital. And I said, well, hey, we've got a marker of inflammation. Why don't I measure it in these people? So back before I was vaccinated, I went into the hot zone at our university in collaboration with Dr. William Messer, who's a virologist at the Oregon Health and Science University. And we measured this in 18 patients that we had blood samples for who were critically ill. And the results, I thought I'd made a mistake at first. The results were beyond my expectations. 10 out of those 18 people that I measured the gamma prime fibrinogen, which is the marker, GPF, had levels that were higher than had ever been reported in a human being before. And that includes 10,600 patients who had previously been measured in a heart attack and stroke risk study called the Atherosclerosis Risk and Communities Study, ARIC. Wow. So at that point, my jaw hit the floor and I went, oh, wow, I think we're onto something here. And so we went back through the medical records of these patients to see if the levels went up, went down, did they trend with how badly the disease was progressing? And sure enough, there were at least 2 patients that we were able to follow. And one of them had gotten clinically much, much worse on day 2 of their hospitalization. And they had given them a steroid to reduce the inflammation in their lungs. And this was before the widespread use of dexamethasone as a steroid for this. So they gave them methylprednisone, which is similar. And so we measured their gamma prime levels at when they entered, on day 2 when they got worse, and on day 3 after they'd gotten the drug. And sure enough, the levels spiked on day 2, right when their clinical signs and symptoms were the worst, and then plummeted like a rock on day 3 after treatment. So I thought, oh, great. Okay, now we've got a companion diagnostic that we could potentially give, because you don't want to give something like dexamethasone or any of these really serious steroids to somebody unless you have to, and not before they need it. Because if you give it to them early in the course of their disease with a virus, it's actually going to blunt their immune response, and they won't be able to reply to the viral insult. So this means that we now have the potential to be able to track people with this test in more or less real time and be able to see who's getting worse and who is a candidate for getting this kind of interventional treatment. So that's the part that we're now doing larger studies. We're continuing to do this work at Oregon Health and Science University. We've also launched a new study in India where we're enrolling 200 patients to be able to look at this there and to see if our expectations are actually going to pan out. We're publishing these results from the preliminary experiments, and they should be coming out on November 13th at the American Heart Association meeting. We've submitted a poster session to that. And so our results should be made public at that point. So we've pivoted from cardiovascular inflammation to COVID in the short term, and that's our beachhead that we're hoping to take off with.
And Dave, I don't even think it's a pivot. I think so. Really, your thesis is a very clear and simple thesis, which is that inflammation is the greatest silent killer in America, maybe the greatest killer in America of anything, right?
Yeah, because if you put together heart attack and stroke, that's the number 1 and number 3 killer in the world.
Yeah, I see it very much like infections in hospitals. Like he died of a leg that went bad. He died of a heart attack. She died of a thing. The infections killed most of them. Like we may call them other things, and it's a little bit like that with inflammation. Like there isn't really a tag that said, "Oh yeah, it was a really bad day. I died from inflammation." No, you died from a heart attack. You died from something, but they were caused by inflammation. And really that's what's so beautiful about what you're doing, and definitely what attracted us to you more than anything, is that you're looking for the root cause of killers.
Yeah.
And you're looking for the root cause of the greatest killers in the world, and you're going after those root causes, and you're providing people with an opportunity to find out about them before it leads to that fatal outcome. That's gold, right?
You're right. It is a silent killer. And the irony of inflammation is that it's probably why we've survived as a species this long, because prior to the 20th century, the biggest killer was infectious diseases. And so if you had a robust inflammation response to all these diseases, that means you lived and your children would live because it's inherited. And so it's great if the biggest thing you're being threatened with is infectious diseases. But after we got antibiotics in the 20th century, we didn't have a need for that anymore. But our bodies didn't know that. They've still got this huge inflammation response. And so as we are able to live longer, the results of that are that we get these chronic diseases like atherosclerosis, which is what leads to heart attacks and strokes. And so now inflammation is actually working against us.
Yeah, it just sucks. Right? There's nothing good about it. It just sucks. Like it's Darwinism at its core. And then so what I believe, what I'm saying about your not pivoting is it's an evolution. And I've spoken about this before. I don't believe in pivoting in general. I believe that there are people who are really good at pure execution, and they listen to their customers, and there are other people who don't listen to their customers. And those people who are better at listening to their customers as a function of pure execution, those people evolve much better. So if you go to market and you go, okay, inflammation's big, it's actually a little bit too big to take on all inflammation, which relates to all things. So I need to listen to our customers' truth and understand which areas of inflammation are the most relevant today, the easiest for us to be able to get into, like frictionless innovation that I always like to go down, and the one that we can have the greatest success at. We can expand it beyond that. We've lots of time. We've our whole lives to expand it into these other areas. But if we don't go after the area that we are guaranteed a win, then we fail because it takes us too long to get to market. And our biggest enemy is actually speed, or the lack thereof. Right. So you were very smart. What you said was the biggest singular discussion today is COVID, right? And it's also, I don't know if it's the biggest killer, but it's up there as the biggest killer. It's pretty nasty where it is. It's certainly the most visible killer that's out there right now. So to move and focus directly on that, because you have something where actually all of the markers point to something that you can really know about beforehand, then that is massively valuable, because nobody is speaking to potential victims about this way in advance. They're just not talking to them. So people don't know. So a lot of the cavalier attitudes that you're going to have out there are actually from people who are at tremendous risk, and they just don't know it.
Yeah, and the thing about COVID is that there's been a lot of examples of blood clots in COVID that are being caused by this huge amount of inflammation. And what we know is that our marker is more than just a marker. It's actually a blood clotting factor. And when it's really, really high, it means that anticoagulants, blood thinners that people typically get in the hospital when they're doing badly on COVID to prevent blood clots, those don't work. So if you're being given heparin in the hospital and your GPF is really high, it's probably not going to work. And there were studies that were just published in the New England Journal of Medicine showing that the most critically ill COVID patients would develop blood clots even when they were on full dose heparin to prevent this. And we know why, because when you have too much of GPF, heparin doesn't work, and you should reach for a different kind of blood thinner.
Yeah. So, okay, convinced. Everybody's convinced. We were convinced before. Everybody listening is convinced right now. It makes sense. We have to get this to market. What does that road to market look like?
So, like I said, this is the beachhead for us. So what we need to do is get the word out, essentially. And that in the science world means getting the news to the right people. And so this American Heart Association meeting, that's the first thing we're doing. That should get it on people's radar screens. And we want the early adopters and the research laboratories to try this out and see for themselves, does this really predict bad outcomes in their patients? Because right now they're flying blind. They don't know who's going to get worse, who's going to get better. And it makes no sense. You see somebody who's perfectly healthy, in their 20s, and they tap out, they're dead. And you get these people that are in nursing homes, in their 80s, and they make it through just fine. It's like, why? We have no markers to go by to guide us in this. And so I'm hopeful that this will be one of those guides. And if we can reach enough people, physicians and researchers, to be able to say, hey, look at this, try it on for size. I think those are going to be the early adopters that are going to push this forward.
And what does the timeline look like? Timeline for development, and then also timeline for money that needs to be raised, and then also timeline for when this hits the market.
Right. So we are actually the diagnostic test itself is CE marked in Europe for cardiovascular use, so it can already be used there. But in the US, we're working towards FDA clearance. We're working towards an emergency use authorization, which is the way that several new diagnostic tests for COVID have gotten through. Yep. So it's the fast track. So you don't have to do, like a 10-year FDA study. You can get it done in a year. And so that's our approach. We have an FDA consultant working closely with us on this. We're doing the clinical studies right now to be able to get the clinical data to support our claims for the FDA. Incredible. And in the initial fundraising, we're raising $500,000 in order to complete these tests and to get the FDA application submitted. So that's first on the radar. And then after that, we'll think about Series A rounds to expand once we've gotten some traction.
And then to get because you get it submitted for that, but what about to go for full clearance?
For full clearance, it's just a process. These emergency use authorization diagnostic tests, for example, are out there. They're being used. And in the fullness of time, then they get full FDA clearance. For example, the vaccines that were originally developed, the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines and the J&J, had emergency use authorization clearance. And as they were used and they gathered more data from the patients who were vaccinated with them, then the FDA eventually gave them full clearance. And that's where they're at right now. So they're fully cleared. They're no longer experimental. And we feel that that's the route that ours will take, is that we'll get emergency use to get it out there, get it sold, let people try it, and then eventually we'll have enough data from lots of studies from lots of different investigators that we can then go to FDA with a more robust application. Because, for example, the emergency use authorizations that I've seen for another inflammatory marker, interleukin-6, there are 3 companies that I've seen who've gotten emergency use authorization for them. And 2 of them had under 100 patients in their cohort, and one had as many as 135. We'll have 200 patients from our India study. So I think this should be more than enough to get us emergency use authorization. And then with more data coming in over time, then we'll have enough for the full, robust FDA submission.
Yeah, makes sense. So we're talking about a year, maybe a little bit more than a year to get it out to market.
Yeah, that's how fast these interleukin-6
very
ones.
Powerful. And so once it gets out there, it's game on. So then what's the potential market size for this? Like, who do we go after? Does everybody... Is everybody somebody serious people? Like
so the way this test is done, it's unfortunately not a point of care test yet. We were working on that. That's in our sites down the road. But right now, it's a clinical laboratory test. So a hospital lab can do it. Mm-hmm. The big players like Quest Diagnostics, LabCorp, ARUP, those kinds of players, they can run it in their labs. And the thing is that they can bring this on in their laboratories and do patient samples even before FDA clearance. There are caveats for its use if it's not FDA cleared, but they can run them. And so that's why we're hoping that the early adopters will pick up on this. As long as their laboratory is approved by a federal an agency called CLIA. They are the ones who certify these labs. If it's run in a CLIA-approved lab, they can do samples from patients and report the results with the caveats that this is not an FDA-cleared test and use it at your own risk. It's research use only.
Fantastic. So in summary, we have very small requirements to at least get this to a place where it has a very good chance of going through. We have a phenomenal team of people who have got decades of experience working in this space. We have an indication which is a huge problem in the world, one of the biggest silent killers that has existed ever. We have a time where right now, what you are looking as your beachhead is singularly the most spoken topic in America. It is more spoken than Donald Trump. Like, I'm just saying, it's a major, major thing. So all of the timing is right. All of the paradigm shift that you're going for, the epic insight that you have is absolutely spot on point. And you're looking for a small amount of investment now on top of what you've already saved from us and from other people so that you can then get that to that place and make sure that you don't miss out on any time whatsoever.
Exactly. And there's only a few things that we need to accomplish to get us to the FDA submission process. So I am very optimistic about that.
Wonderful. And Dave, how can everybody contact you here?
My Gamma Diagnostics email or through Expert Dojo. The Gamma Diagnostics is just all run together. GAMMA diagnostic, all one word.com. And my email is David Farrell, DAVAD.Farrell, FARRELL, at gammadiagnostics.com.
Wonderful. Or else just contact me at brian@expertdojo.com, and I'm very happy to loop in Dave. Dave, thanks ever so much. Great discussion. Obviously, I love what you're doing over there. I believe everybody who's listening has got a great feel for all of the upside and where you're going, and just wonderful being a part of your journey.
Well, and thanks for your faith and the faith of Expert Dojo in us. It's very much appreciated.
Easy peasy. That's a wrap, my friend. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.